All right, people. So while you are simultaneously thinking about this, I'm going to talk about voting, which has to do with all of this business as well. All right. So, and it's about success. So we've had some, we've talked about spreading. So this connects into that as well. This is why things take off in a more general kind of sense. So people have thought about where superstars come from, right, in different ways, and economists have thought about it in particular. Going back some time, this is 30 years ago, and as with all of these papers, you can look at them if you like. So the economics of superstars. So a typical kind of economics approach. Here's the first observation as given in this paper. Full-time comedians in the world at this point, 200. Soloists in classical music, just a very few. I mean, it's still the same, like people who get paid to be golfers, who get paid to be full-time authors. They're a pretty small subset, right? Of course, they mention economic textbooks because they couldn't help themselves. But again, we get these highly skewed distributions in terms of success, right? And so if we're economists, we think, well, that's a revealing of the quality, right? So you could say that the ordering that you end up with in life is a reflection of the underlying quality of the people who are becoming successful, okay? So let's say that happens, and it's that the reward is convex, right? So this is typical, right? The second derivative is greater than 0. And there are a couple of reasons for why that might be. So why does, say, underlying quality, whatever that means, quality to reward, that could map linearly. If we're in some sort of socialist situation, it maps like this, right? In principle, but it doesn't really. There's a little bit of, like some kind of weird bubblings going on, right? It could be that. But the idea is it's this, right? And so why is that? Well, here's an example. So a very good surgeon is, more than twice as good as two that are half as good, right? So in some sense, right? So that you don't want a couple of mediocre, you could have 10 mediocre surgeons around you. You'd rather have one that is extremely good. So the money goes to those people who are thought to be better. And technology, right? So that you can't reproduce your surgeon so well, but you can reproduce your music or your books, whatever it is. Those things you can augment someone tremendously. Now, right? It used to be that you would have to go and listen to someone sing. You just would have to go, right? We didn't record. The first recordings of anyone speaking that still exist, 18, what is it? It's after photographs, I think. Yeah, right. I mean, it's not very long ago, to be honest, right? We'd invented a lot of other stuff by then, but yeah, there you go, yeah. And recording it really well took, that took, of course, longer and so on. Okay, but that ability is a big deal. So it's this idea of joint consumption that people can, right? They're not excluding each other. Public good, of course, you're all eating the same paddock or whatever it is. Here you can replicate the paddock. That is what we call fields, where I come from. Yeah, right.
Only a couple people can appreciate a really good surgeon because they only ever see a certain number of people. But all of the U.S. listens to just people.
He said incriminatingly. Yeah, sure. They're different things. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Right. And the scope of them, will change. But the suggestion, at least I'm just telling you what this goes. The suggestion is that there's this, right? The fact that this is greater than 0 is because you can't, the way substitution could work. And as we've talked about, art and music and cultural goods, it's a bit tricky to figure out why something is much. And the triptych that just sold for $140 million, it's the most expensive piece of art ever. I mean, it's a triptych, 3 pieces. I don't know. I can't. And there was a Warhol that just sold for over $100 million. I mean, it's a lot of money to be. There's $100 million here and a painting, and you swap them. And that seems sort of, right? a lot of people believe in that $100 million as cash, right? Which is all made up too, but we believe in that one much more strongly, right? You can go and buy bananas with $10 or whatever. You can take that, but you can't, it's hard to deal with that. The painting is it's a funny thing to put that, to put your belief into, but that's a swap. And it's belief about the future and all sorts of things. But okay, so here's an opposite kind of aspect, which is, so this is a few years later. Imagine, this is Adler, imagining, well, what happens if everyone's quality is the same, right, to start with? What can you get an uneven distribution out of that? And that's a interesting kind of aspect that we'll dig into with an experiment that I want to talk to you about. So, right, we're people. So we want to coordinate in various ways. We'd like to do that. You can argue for all sorts of reasons as why that happens. But we want to be on the same team. So that our team beats their team, all sorts of things, right? So there's that. There's just people sort of synchronizing, and that can lead to differential success, right? So that Bieber is a huge thing because it's fun to talk about Bieber, but he sort of could have been replaceable by someone else. But so that in that sense, it's purely a social construction. It's completely made up in our heads, which fits with a lot of our views of, perhaps, of your views of modern art, right? And how do you measure inherent quality? I mean, is that even a measurable piece? I mean, it's unavoidable. You want to talk about it. I mean, people have, you look at sport. I mean, we just had this example for NFL, right? I mean, what is the inherent quality, right? There are various measures of those players that are made in all the games they play, and then there are various strength tests and so on. So they're numbers, and you can see if they transform into success later on. All right, so we know that, yes, there's going to be some role of some inherent, some whatever weird inherent quality, and then some, how am I going to do with this? And then some measure of some luck and chance and so on, right? So let's see if we can figure those things out. And again, it will play into these skewed distributions. All right, so there's some funny things that happen with all sorts of, with voting systems. I'll mention a few different kinds, because essentially this is kind of a voting problem, right? You vote, every time someone listens to Bieber, they're voting, right? Unless they're kind of, or buys his album, they're voting. So this is, it's hard to figure out all the details here, but there's a website called jike.com, may not exist anymore. But they're very easy decisions. It's about opinions, right? Someone puts up a question, and then people basically can just put yes or no, right? Anonymously, so it's really quick. That tends to lead to bandwagoning if you look at how those things go. And there's more work recently that shows that, and I mentioned this, I think, that positive statements made early on tend to be reinforced. Negative ones tend to be kind of sorted out, actually, if they're in some sense false, right? So made up negative things tend to be sorted out. Obviously it depends on the crowd. So self-selection is a bit of a problem. So you can imagine that that's what's going on here. So Amazon, you get all these positive votes early on, these positive statements. People are then motivated perhaps to, if they don't like the thing, to say, by the way, this is my terrible experience, right? Amazon people, you're required to write some amount, so people tend to put, you'd see it now and then. People will say, I am just typing to fill up my character limit. You don't see that too much. People usually, actually write something on Amazon. So there's a sense that these are costs, there's more costs, right, in putting up your vote here. And that tends maybe to draw out people who will say opposite things. So really positive stuff tends to revert to a mean. This one has more bandwagoning. So there's, that's an interesting possibility that this is more generally true. I don't know. How do you get people to talk about it, to actually enter? Oh, that's a really hard problem. Yeah. And some of the big sites. Oh, so Amazon, I mean, they've worked hard for a long time to make themselves they named themselves Amazon for a very cute. They wanted to be the biggest thing there is. That's where the name comes from. It's because it's not just going to be about books. We're going to run the whole thing. So we'll see how they go, but they continue to do that. And their big thing is trust, actually. One of their biggest things is trust. Like they're good at making sure the thing works. They don't do everything at all. They do a lot of things, but that was something that took a long time to just, make robust. Yeah, I think those specialty places, it's more like forums probably, that people, where they talk about whatever it is, piano tuning or fish keeping, like people will go there and spend a lot of time there and in essence write reviews. But it's not worth your while to be like a little voice when there are 3 other voices, like that just. But unless you kind of really, you really love writing stuff, so you're going to be, I'm going to say something here on this side about this thing because I either really like it or I really don't. That's very hard to tease out. I mean, what I just said, I don't know if that's true, but moderate voices, it's like, okay. Yeah, people, they send emails to try and get you involved. Like, I'll give you a rebate if you write something, but that's, ultimately not great, right? Something like Amazon now has such a big structure that it's actually kind of a good thing to contribute to. It will probably last, and it's not a complete waste of your time, and yeah. Okay, a couple of other things. This is a very interesting paper from a few years ago now, and it's about voting, and it's quite mathematical actually, but the overall idea is that just scoring individuals seems to work better than it removes a lot of the problems that you have with rank-based, where you say, say voting, right? Here's my candidate 1, here's number 2, here's number 3. And then someone else can say 1, 2, 3, or 1, 3, 2, right? They order them in different ways. There's a famous paradox, arrow paradox, which is that you can end up with A being preferred to B, being preferred to C, being preferred to A in certain, somewhat unusual circumstances, but it can happen. Whereas if you, say you've got 3 candidates and you give them 0 out of 10s, or give them 1 to 5 stars. Everyone's used to Amazon and Netflix and so on. Not everyone in the world, but a lot of people are used to that kind of scale on the web. So, let them do that. So you can impart more information. Like you might want to give both presidential candidates a 0, or you might want to give 1 over here and a 2 over here out of 10. Like both, right? Or you might want to give a 10 and a 0, whatever it is. But you're actually the information you can deliver is reduced, which is a very interesting issue about voting, democracy, and so on.
My
Right?
mom worked for NSF, and I guess at one point she was asking somebody about because they rank stuff, and I guess they profile on every single person who has done share, who would be share.
Oh yeah,
On
how they behave.
how they will rank things. So some people will give like really high scores, and some people
Oh, and then, so they know how to kind of,
try to rate on.
yeah. So someone is not worth it's not their opinion gets a little downgraded. If they hate everything or they love everything, then they're not discriminating. Yeah. We can look at whether they vote for the things that succeed as well. All sorts of stuff. Yeah. Oh, runoff voting? Instant runoff? Well, Australia. That's in Australia. It's huge in Australia, and it's totally.
Everybody nobody knew it was on the ballot until like.
The thing is, it's also hard. It's harder to grasp, and you can have things that feel a little funny.
Everybody that was making that argument understood it. They were just saying it was harder for other people to grasp.
Right, but you can see why. No. You can see why. I mean, it was impressive to get it in, but you could see why there'd be a barrier to get it in the first place.
Right.
And if something goes wrong, you could see why a whole team could rise up and say, no, like this is bad. But it is good, by and large. We actually used it in our elections for like college president, all sorts of, which means the students, right? College is where the students live. So, and I remember we had the countback thing. So if you end up with the same number of votes, you do the countback. So we had one case where it was equal when you went back and equal and equal. So they ended up, which is very unusual. We had a joint pair running the thing. Because usually that doesn't happen, right? But it actually worked out that, yeah. I don't know what the chances were. It's pretty small. Well, let me, wow. Yeah, I know. All right, so, okay. So this is a paper from 2004. Again, it's a modeling thing, but they did a very nice job. So you've got n objects, which do have some underlying quality Q, which is distributed in some way. Really just an ordering, perhaps, but you get some variable. Okay, so it's distributed in some way, and that would play into it. And then people are allowed to, it's a model. People, in a sense, are allowed to choose the objects to vote on or to compare based on how many votes they already have. So this is a sensible thing, right? So we're always ranking things, and you see the top 10 or you see whatever, so people see those things, right? But imagine it's something that's a little more distributed. There's just sort of the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what everyone else has done before. You look at what people have voted for, so you go, all right, I'm going to look at the top ones. You can't help yourself. And they did a couple of things. One was, some power alpha here, and then the same thing, but also then multiplying by this underlying quality. Right? And it was comparative ranking, actually, I believe. Okay, so if alpha is less than 1, so this is a sublinear sort of story, then you get the correct ordering, because the things down the bottom aren't getting buried. But if it's superlinear, then it's never sorted out. So if you have a mechanism that is, as people are voting, it's ongoing, they're presenting, it's becoming more and more clear the things that are in front. I mean, this should make sense. It fits with some of the stuff we've done. This sort of matches up with the rich gets richer story. Then it's never sorted out. You never retrieve that underlying quality. It's related to Adler stuff and the stuff I'll show you, I guess, on Thursday. But let me get to that. I'll get to the experiment. I want to set up a little more beforehand. So this is a crazy experiment. It's I believe it's true of chickens that if they can set up pecking order. They do. I mean, this is where pecking orders come from. They set up a pecking order. You can isolate them and then bring them back, and you can get different arrangements, right, occurring. I'm not sure if you reran middle school over and over, if that would happen, how much, but I suspect it would because of the experiment that I'll show you. This is an experiment. It's like pecking, but it's for fish. These fish tend to have a go at each other. It's a paper that was in PNAS 11 years ago. And here's the story, right? So you have a graduate student who has to watch fish tanks, in this case. They've done all sorts of things, these graduate students. So these ones had to watch fish tanks and then figure out who was pecking who and who was dominating, right? So you've got 4 fish in each tank. They're supposed to be a similar size, so it's sort of a fair game to start with. And this is a case where A, B, C, D, this is the ordering that arose. And then they're separated for some period of time and put back in a tank. And this is the ordering that ends up at, so there's in 6, how many were, 22, there are 22 observations. So 6 of them came back the same, right? They ran it again, the fish sorted themselves out in the same way. But you got these sorts of things. So there's one case where A became the epsilon fish, or a delta fish, I suppose, and then the D fish became the alpha. There were complicated initial states that ended up being sorted out in different ways, complicated final states. Again, here's D going up for the win. And A really losing out. So these are, there are two of these little, that are the numbers at the bottom. But 3/4 of the time, the hierarchy changed. So that's pretty, pretty weird. These are some other details here. Didn't quite hear what you said, and I'm probably relieved about that. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about, this is related to what we've been talking about. I've been telling you about this experiment we ran some years ago now. It continues to be influential, which is somewhat ironic, I suppose. But so it's about fame and success, why things take off. So it's called Music Lab. Matt Selganic was the grad student who led this. It was his, I don't think it was in all of his PhD, but it was a major part of his PhD. He's now at Princeton and actually working at Microsoft Research. Okay, so, and was done with, and Duncan Watts as well, right? So this is when we were at Columbia. So the idea, so Matt got 48 songs from this kind of no-name MP3 site. It wasn't particularly famous or anything. Probably doesn't exist anymore. Okay, so but he just simply actually randomly chose artists to write to, and these are garage, like true garage band or living room band kind of people, right? They record it, they throw it up, and we'll see what happens. So he wrote to a whole bunch of people. There was one that was serious enough to have a lawyer write back, which was kind of interesting. But 48 of them, we got 48 that would, or we chose 48 to say, who said they would say yes, and created a kind of a little online music download site. It's an experiment. People know it's an experiment. Various kinds of people came to this experiment. The first lot was all from a teenage website. Actually, it was advertised there for free. And then we invited people from the Small World experiment because we had about 100,000 email addresses there. Okay, so we had 30,000 people more or less in this whole thing. And okay, the question is, how probable is the world, right? So if we run the thing again, do we get the same results? And this is something often debated, talked about in history and so on. And there are, Doctor Who, for example, there are points you can't change in time, which is a ludicrous story. But they're not so good with the physics. Right. But, right, and can we at times, like, try to estimate that volatility, right? Are we in some sort of bottleneck in history where things will, kind of go in some well-predicted way? Or is it really open? Is it really crazy? Okay. And then what we're going to look at is, which ones of these songs take off? Do they take off in different ways? And do we get superstars and so on? Of course, it's not going to run for long enough to do that, but it's going to touch on that idea. Right. All right. So you can't read this, but this is what it looked like. This is the presentation. It was definitely a better website than the Small World one, which was pretty awful to look at, but it was a nice looking thing. Okay, so there's this layout like this. It's random. So this is an initial experiment. It's random for you. So you come in, you log in, you answer some questions. We sort of check to see if you've been there before, various other pieces. And there's a number of downloads written here, and that's what this entry is. So that's how many people have come before, how many times this song has been downloaded. So what you could do is click on this, a little player came up, listen to it, you could rate it, which we didn't really use that information in this paper. And then you could download it. So that action was the thing that we took as a sign of, as a vote, that you liked it. It was free, keep it. All right, I guess this wouldn't work anymore. So there were 8, so what people didn't know is that there were, everyone got a random presentation, which was fixed for you. Also after 2 hours, anything you did after that was ignored, so that was just another feature. But there were 8 parallel worlds like this, okay? So if you saw, the downloads that you saw in your world were for people just in your world, right? And then there were 8 of those. And then there was one other world where we put about 10% of people into, so you're randomly assigned to worlds as you come along. We put about 10% of people into this last world where it was independent, right? So there were no downloads. You couldn't see the numbers of downloads. You were just there. You didn't see, there was no social signal whatsoever from anyone else. Okay. And so fair enough? Okay. So the layout was this, so it's 3 by 16. So that fitted nicely on one page, which was useful. Then we shifted in the 3 more versions of the experiment to a straight list like this. Classic thing, right? So this is ordered by number of downloads, so top 10 kind of thing, or top 48 in our case. So one thing we noticed is that people, of course, will click on the top song. They have to, which was the point of this. Here, because it's random, the top song, you had to really search for it. Second, third, it becomes harder to see. Fair enough. Here it's given to you, and it's dynamic because it's changing depending on what's happening in the experiment before you. People have also clicked on the last one because they want to, it's a natural thing to do. Like, what is this? What's the range? So there was a little more clicking for the last one, which was kind of a nice human thing to do. Like, how bad is the bottom one? What's that? Right. Just, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just so you, because there's clearly a range for you. Yeah. So this is how it's laid out. Let's see what is going on in this thing. What is this like? Now, from a personal point of view, the songs that didn't do well typically were pretty bad. But that's a personal thing, right? So that's what we're not. Okay. So how do you judge that? That's sort of the problem. But I sort of broadly okay to say that. What was the? Yeah, okay, yeah, right. Well, I'll show you how they did. All right, so this is rank and for experiment 1 and 2, right? So this is the rank of the song, is 1 being the best, down to 48 in the independent world, right? So this is the first song down to 48. We just have that one thing. And so for every one of these points, there are 8 little circles here, and each one is the rank of that song in each one of these interdependent worlds. Okay? So you see the song that did best in the independent world, in this case, it didn't really go out of the top 5. So it was, we couldn't, you could try to somehow control it. You'd have to do some other kind of processing with people early on with their judgments to get some distribution of quality as, it's hard to explain, because I don't want to talk about inherent quality. There really isn't such, there is a little bit, but there isn't such quite a thing, right? It's based on the population that's viewing it, which could be, you change in people who are maybe older or from a different culture or whatever it is, and you'll get a different ordering, on top of the randomness that is just inherent to this system. So what I'm trying to say is, we took 48 songs and there's some variation. So here's the worst song that's usually being found out. So if you see this down here, the 48th song in the interdependent world, it never came first. But inside, there's a huge range of variation. There's a song that came first in one and 40th in another. That's pretty bad, right? That's a huge. So if it was all perfect and we're all good at sorting out quality, the Rosen story I told you the other day, you're all on this line, right? 1 will go to 1, 2 will go to 2. Yeah. But that is a huge bubbling. Okay. You don't see any previous downloads. Okay, so for each one of these, there are 8 worlds plus 8 interdependent worlds where you're seeing what other people have done before you, and 1 independent one. And there's 8 of those over here again, and 1 independent one, which gives us a way of constructing not a measure of quality, but what this population left to their own devices would think of these songs. And then what happens if they're following each other? Just this little bit. You don't know if they're the same as you, the other people. You have no idea. You just see download them. So a thing to add here is it's a very weak social signal. Right. It's hard to tell from here, and I'll show you some plots that kind of deal with this, that it looks somewhat similar, but there's, again, this huge scatter, right? Massive scatter. The very best song, again, doing pretty well here, and the worst one is, struggling. But it did bubble up to, I think that's 36th here, which is pretty spectacular for one that's universally reviled. But you've got songs that were, in the 40s. Here it's, 13th or 14th. This is pretty nuts. We like to think we're good at sorting things out. This is the number of downloads, so it's a similar kind of, it's the same. This plot gets turned in the previous ones when you go to ranks. So this is the number of downloads, or the fraction of the market share, if you like, the fraction of downloads that a song ended up with, and then in the independent world, and then in the 8 interdependent worlds. So this is the winning, the best song, right? So you can see here, the first 2, 3 songs, did well in the independent one, and then it's a little more tight in here. And these tended to do well, but this is below, this one here is below a lot of these points here, and so on. You can see there's a little more of this runaway success. We can't run this thing forever. It's not enormous. We don't have 10,000 songs. We can't get quite that superstar story out. And again, it's a weak signal, but you can see they did better, right? The best song does better when people are following each other, which should make sense, but there's an extra piece to this. Okay, so you measure a couple of things. One is the Gini coefficient, which we can go into, but it's a measure of inequality, right? So when it's 1, it's unequal in the sense that would be the case where one song has all of the downloads and the rest have 0. That would be, right? And if everyone has the same number, right? No one is special. Everyone has the same number. Then we have 0. Gini coefficient would be 0. Right? So you can see what's this piece. And there are various ways to calculate this thing. But this is the market share here. Okay. All right. So there's a measure of inequality. The higher, the more unequal. So this is the first experiment with the random layout. So these guys are all more unequal than the independent world, right? So there's inequality in the independent world, fair enough. But the ones where people start to follow each other a little bit, the inequality goes up. Okay, so this is a suggestion of that. And then the inequality is worse when that following is much easier to do. This is this is where the thing is laid out. Linearly in front of you, it's easier to see what other people have done. So that inequality goes up across the board, right? And this is just a function of the people coming in. Okay. So a second thing is unpredictability. So this is talking about you've got some ordering of the songs in one world and an ordering in another world. How well do those orderings match up, regardless of their market share, actually? Okay, it's a messy thing. But this is to say that if you compare all of these worlds with each other, so you've got choose 2 worlds to compare with each other, then you get this kind of degree of disorder between them. You can measure this in different ways. But it's much with the independent one, you can just do things. You can do things like break it in half, right? Because it's independent, and then create 2 artificial independent worlds and compare how well they did. Or, take the first half, the second. You do all sorts of things with that, right? So there's some unpredictability in that sense as well for the independent kind of estimations, but it's much worse. Worse. It's stronger here when people are following each other, and then much stronger when people are following each other in a clearer way. Right? So we turn up the social signal, the disorder between worlds goes up. So I have a summary, I guess, of this, but I tend to get ahead of myself. Right? So okay. So there are a number of things that make sense, and then it sort of goes out, and we have to understand the last part. So we increase the social signal by going from a layout like this to a list layout. So it's easier to see what other people have done. So you get greater following and greater inequality. So that makes sense. That seems fair enough, right? This is somewhat peculiar. Because you've got this greater inequality, but actually there's more unpredictability. Right? You might think it's easy to go from get to this point and think, well, I guess all right, it's more unequal, but the good guys are still winning. But actually, it's more jumbled. It's actually more jumbled because, well, the initial things that happen matter more now, right? Who gets out in front early on? That has it's a rich gets richer thing. They have a better chance of then succeeding later on, right? So there's a little bit of fickleness at the start, and certainly to start with, it's just a bare. Right? There are no downloads. The thing is just laid out randomly. People start to mess around with it. Maybe they download it, right? So I think you can imagine if you then have 10,000 songs or whatever it is, 10,000 cultural artifacts or 100 million of them, much harder thing to sort through, right? So the difficulty of sorting things out at the start, coupled with this following thing, or this rich gets richer, leads to unpredictability. But that's not the thing you immediately go for. And then this is a story thing, I suppose. So you've got these much more unequal distributions than this sort of thing. Right, so here's Harry Potter out here or Mona Lisa. Then we start to tell stories, right? I mean, this thing is 10 times as good as the second one. 1 billion people can't be wrong, right? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. It has to be out there for good reasons, right? So it suggests that there really is underlying quality that's varying strongly, and we're just it's being mapped to what people are choosing to do. But it actually could be that people have that people are following each other. Much more that this is the mechanism. I mean, after the fact you can say, oh, this is obvious and so on, but so lots more social construction. Yes?
So would that suggest that, well, when you make like an individual Google search, you want the best result on the top, but it's in Google's best interest to jumble it up a bit so that you have to find the best stuff rather than
to help you search for it. Yeah, no, well that is true, and it's yes, and the same with Amazon, for example.
construct a good network, not for an individual search.
So you do your search and you get this thing laid out, and which is reflective of what other people have wanted.
Right. Like if I want the best result, I just want it to give me the best result. I want to know the most people like this one. But if Google wants to build a World Wide Web with the best stuff ranked the
Well, they do that. They look at that, sure.
The third one was the best one.
They look at that.
It took everyone to the third one.
No one goes to the second page, basically. That's pretty, it's a disaster if you have to look at the second page. There are 100,000 hits or whatever, or 20 billion, and you do not look at the second page because you know it's failed. Maybe I don't understand quite what you're saying, but I think it's that.
Well, you were saying that this independent one,
Yeah.
actually rather that your first study where things were randomized a bit,
Yeah.
actually better mapped the independent ranking because people were not following initial leads
Yeah.
as strongly.
But it's unavoidable.
Well, no, so that's a good thing mapping
Yeah.
what people actually thought was best without.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, absolutely. And so you'll see it all, like small scales. Maybe I mentioned this. One thing that people like to do, and they have meetings or retreats, and there's voting about things, and you get stickers or something like this, and there might be, put on a big piece of paper the number of, we're going to choose from these 4 things. So you've got 5 stickers. Maybe there are 30 things, and you're given 5 stickers, and you're allowed to, put all 5 in one box if you really want that one, or you're allowed to distribute them. And that seems like a really nice idea, but of course, it suffers from this initial conditions thing, right? The first people up there, put some things, and that starts to, it's not an independent vote, right? And it's the same with having or secret ballots. I mean, secret ballots are just really essential in getting, we have faculty meetings where we've had to try and stop it because you have to vote by raising your hand. And you're like, it's really wrong. You can't do that. If it's about something that really matters and not everyone's in obvious agreement, that's just a very fraught thing to do. So that's, when it's all local and so on. But yeah, in terms of getting people to express their true opinion, you have to set up a structure so that they're not following or being coerced or whatever it is. This all seems fine. It's like, let's just vote. But it's really tough on people. Something like Amazon, it's being reinforced all the time, right? So other people bought this thing, so you say, oh, okay, I'll buy that as well. Whatever, this happens. So that just rich gets richer stuff is being built in all the time. You don't. That's kind of obvious there, but it's happening all the time in little ways, in everything that gets presented to you. Words people use. Right? There's some sort of voting thing that's happening, and it's hard to avoid it. Social gravity? Yeah. Yeah, well, you're falling into something for sure. Yeah, and it's a black hole, I guess, when it goes really wrong. Yeah, that's... I will say that years ago when we did the small world stuff, we had this idea that it would be great to have a search algorithm that also presented you with whatever it was, opposing views or things that are really opposite to what you search for, to stop that. So the filter bubble, I think, has been a framing of this recently. Is that what it's called? I think that there's a TED talk. Right, everything's being filtered for you, so you don't really get that free choice anymore because, and it is hard. You can't sort everything out, so and people, generally you get some things that are serviceable for sure, but you can see that stuff gets lost. That may be equally as good. And especially if it's a world where just the one thing wins, not so good. Yeah, I don't know how you do this well, but something you search for things, or you're kind of looking around and something that bumps you and if you want, like gives you these are opposing views. There have been some efforts to do that, but nothing that's great. Because, here's the thing you're looking for, and there's everything else. What's opposing it? There's stuff that's just different, which is fast. Okay. Yeah? Stop talking. Okay. So following, so it's a story thing. And I do have this other sequence of slides. Maybe I'll just race through them that kind of summarizes all of these things. Okay, so there was a final experiment. The paper was published by Matt a few years later, and Duncan, but we set this up. This is around the time I was leaving. So we set this up. So this is the third experiment. Had no great results. So it was just to run in parallel the second experiment type thing again, right? So now we have, let's say, I guess there were, it was just running along there, just a few worlds, not so many. And so it's the as I said, it's the linear layout, right? So it's the stronger signal story. So that's running. So then we took one of those worlds and replicated it. So now it's got 2 copies of it. And in those 2 copies, we turned the ordering upside down. So we did a bad thing, right? It's very naughty. So this is the number of people who have come in. So here it's about 750. It's just when we pushed the button and did this flip. So now we let the original experiment just keep running. We replicate it, and we turn the rankings upside down, right? So now the worst song is the best, and the best song is the worst. So we know it's not going to sort itself out because we know that just starting from 0 things are kind of messy. But the question was, could it somehow resurrect itself a little bit? So this goes to payola, right? So here's song 48. Its number of downloads here as a function of the number of people who come in. Song 1. So song 48 is just terrible, right? Just a disaster. Okay, so now it's number 1. Well, first of all, here's what song 1 did in the original experiment when we just let it keep going. And here's what song 48 did, right? So they kept following this pretty linear kind of path here. But we flipped this up, and song 48 is now starts to take off, right? It's at the top of the list, and people are like, and they start to download it. But not at that rate, not at the rate that this song that was deemed to be first or surfaced to number 1 in that first experiment did. Song 1 actually, and you saw that spread of the qualities of these things, the independently judged qualities, is actually starting to dig itself out, right? People found that one and listened to it, and they managed to get out. And so each dashed line is its own separate experiment. This is song 47, so it's similarly doing well after being, this is where it would have been, or was, for this one other experiment, that's where it was going. It's not getting a much bigger rate, to be honest, but it's increasing. Song 2, right, it's been kicked down here. This is where it did go for the one experiment we left running. And here it is, it's doing okay, but it's not going to get sorted out. We don't expect it to get that same list back, but we expect to get something we might hope to get something a bit better back. But if you manipulate the system early on, very different outcomes. And it should be clear from this that song 2 is not getting the downloads, right? If you think of this as dollars or whatever it is, it's not bringing in the bucks anymore. Song 47 is doing better for itself. Song 48 is certainly doing better for itself. But the overall performance of this system, not so good, right? So the whole thing, so you may be in charge of song 48, right? And this is your thing. You somehow put it at the front of the queue. So you're thrilled because it's getting, you're making money. But it's a classic kind of thing where there's a sort of a disaster for the whole system, right? So this is the pretend rich gets richer, but at a slower rate, and I don't have this. So it's payola, right? So you pay to get your songs on the radio. I mean, of course it works in lots of other fields, but quite literally there has been this effort to do that, and it's called payola, and you get your song on the radio, and then everyone downloads it and whatever listens to it and so on, and thinks it's kind of okay because everyone else is listening to it, but that was all made up. But the whole system doesn't work as well. That's the thing. It works for you, but the whole system is being hurt. Yeah. So it is in your interest to game it. I mean, there's a lot of paradox. It's in your interest to game it, but not collectively. Things go down. Yeah. Fever, I don't know. Ooh, yeah. Shades of Grey, right, is actually fan fiction for that. That's where it comes from, which is amazing to me. No, that's what it was. It was fan fiction because they just didn't think there was enough whatever in it. And so this person writes this thing, and then that becomes its own thing. Movies too now, right? Humans. Also incriminatingly. Yeah. It's okay. Sorry, okay, yes. You. Oh, they trick you with a thing? That happens still a lot on things like YouTube, right? the video will be, like there's a video that's taking off,
Video,
and everyone else calls the video that. And it's got some,
it's just a picture, like, he wants
they want you to, they're trying to, yeah, it's really dubious, yeah. And you hate them. So you hate them, right? They're trying to get themselves into this category, and you know, maybe they get a few, you know, they get some reward for it because it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, but then there's voting system. And you see that there's
They go down, right? Yeah.
Is this like
It's like spam, right? I mean, spam must work a little bit because 1 in a billion people click on the thing, and it's that one person that's killing everyone else. Yes, I will buy these things. Thank you for sending them to me. Anyway,
I'm just curious, is this like a feedback story? Like, if you were told, if you're running, you're tracking yourself and you're modulating your running pattern based on
Your-
distance or
yeah.
how long. If that was giving you false information, would you?
oh, that's been done. Yeah, those experiments have been done actually. Yeah, I'm trying to remember some of them offhand, but yeah, people have been. Yeah, lying about the wattage that's on the bike in front of you, that you know, on your watt meter.
Like generally, when you have feedback, like when you get biofeedback, you perform better. And just curious.
Yeah,
if that
I
was-
mean, people set their clocks a little. I mean, they do various little tricks to kind of, you know,
you set your clock,
Oh, I forget.
actually forget that, right?
Is that why like Candy Crush does the thing where you can see where your steps are?
Oh, I see. I don't know about this game.
I mean, that's
Should I learn this game? What is it? Candy what?
Competition went through years. Like for world record sprints,
Yeah.
they have people sprint along with you for parts of it. Like, so if you're trying to do a
Even pace setters.
mile-
Pace setters, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was the story with Bannister. Bannister had pace setters.
Right.
And then Landy didn't, he was the first to do it. But all these people broke the 4-minute mile straight away, you know. The 4-minute mile, this is Bannister, right? Breaking the 4-minute mile, right? And then suddenly, it's 3:43 is the record now, I think. But then all these other people were like, oh, I can do that.
Right.
I mean, it was something that was sitting around for a while. It was actually, we were looking at this the other day. The way records descend is kind of funny. But yeah, also I think maybe Bannister, that was also in the era where training more than twice a week was cheating, I think. Right? You know about this? I mean, he was a doctor. He had a real job.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be a lot of sports were like that. You train on Tuesday and Thursday and play the sport on a Saturday, and that's it, you know. But
We're professional.
no, they're not professionals. No, right. And then, but there was also an idea that training more than that was actually cheating. That was sort of, you know,
The Olympics
not really the done thing sort of thing, you know.
The Olympics should be for people, not,
Yeah, but it's, yeah.
Not athletes.
things that are
Yeah, well,
funded
okay.
by, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, the 1970s were fun. I mean, there's still some obviously spectacular drugs involved now, but yeah, there was some pretty interestingly shaped humans in the 1970s, coming out of Eastern Europe, right, in particular, but kind of everywhere. It's like, yeah, sure. I mean, look at baseball, yeah, right? I mean, I guess what we're getting there is that arms race. That's off track a bit, but it's the arms race problem, right? I mean,
Right.
if it's just a simple game thing, you have to run from here to here. How do you get better? You know, after you figure out that training 7 days a week helps, right? Because that's the first. That was a big transition. Let's train some more. Let's do strength training. So you do all those things. You eat all your wheat bix or whatever it is, and then, you know, here's some funny juice. Drink some funny juice. Yeah.
I think they could allow every
Oh, okay. You could have a different Olympics for that one, right?
But then everybody's on the same footing.
Lonely Island is a video.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. So there are two things there. One is it costs a lot to do drugs well. Not that I've checked, but it does cost a lot. So the more money you pay, the better situation you have. And Armstrong has become a big example. And different people respond differently to these things. So that's the second piece. Some people get a huge bump, and then some people are monsters who don't actually get much better. So that's why it's not.
Start drugging
Okay, all right.
Genetically,
Yeah.
so let's drug
I don't know. I mean, maybe eventually we'll just say, running 100 meters is kind of cool, but it's pretty silly. It's, I mean, drugs or whatever, right? I mean, you can't get much better. Maybe a little, but not a lot better. Well, we've already had that debate a little bit. I do have this set of slides that I can. I don't know if I even put this on the web. I'm just going to flick through this, but it's a summary of things that have just occurred, basically, right? So, quickly, right? So we talked about this, like why, here's the paradox. It's very famous. Right? These guys can't predict anything. I think she went to 12 or 13 editors, right? Before one of them said, "Okay, this is pretty good." And apparently the story was the person in charge. What's the press? Harry Potter. Small, here it's Scholastic, right? It was, what is the UK one? Bloomsbury, yeah. Because his granddaughter liked the book a little bit. It was a mess. Yeah. I will tell you, I read this on a plane to Australia once. And my wife had given it to me, exactly that kind of, right? And I remember I finished, I said, it's pretty good, but I'm not sure why this is this is 1998 or something. I'm not sure why this is. I mean, it's got all these elements that so many other things have. I mean, it really was. It's not just no. I mean, it is actually a book with words in it that it is a story, right? So, yeah, but it's interesting. Yeah. We've talked about this one. So, and then here's the framing, right? So we understand bushfires. This is Australia, which is usually on fire or underwater, or sometimes the same thing. Both.
Not, then there's poisonous things attacking you.
Yeah, well, there are actually snakes coming out of here. They're coming to share, your ecological situation. What's that? Well, actually, yeah, you wear boots and you're pretty good. But actually, all the snakes I saw as a kid, poisonous. Yeah. Your average snake is deadly poisonous. It's terrifying. What's that? No, the cane toads are kind of nasty. You don't lick the cane toads. Don't lick them, people. Some spiders are bad, but it's really the snakes. Snakes are spectacularly bad. Yeah. All right, it's the system properties, what I've been trying to say over and over in various ways about why things spread, why they take off. We know a spark starts the fire, but we get excited about the spark, and then we make two mistakes when we think about social wildfires, what I'll call social wildfires. And then it's sitting right here, actually, right? So the tipping point, yes, everyone is excited about Malcolm Gladwell with the beautiful stories. This is a classic example. Let's have an this is true in so many areas where we tell stories, right? You tell a story and then generalize, and tell a story and then generalize, right? It happens in religion. It happens on NPR. It happens, in political spheres. Like here is, Mary Jane. That is why, the other side must be, wiped from the earth, right? Because of this little story, Anecdotes, right? It's a problem. Okay, but here it is. Here's the focus, right? It's the match. The match is the reason that this thing burned, not because it was incredibly hot and the fire, the trees were connected to each other, which was kind of a big deal, actually. We saw that one. Oh yeah, this is good. So we're storytelling machines, right? So Homo narrativus is the framing that I put for this. So all sports commentary are kind of like this. Although you will see, there are good commentators who will say this could be the pivotal moment. Like this could be, like it might not be. It depends how things pan out, right? And it's true. Someone hits a home run in the third game of the World Series and, maybe it's the changing point. But if they lose, then it wasn't. It's kind of weird as to how you, So some people are cognizant of that, right? And they're aware of it. Okay, so that's true. The rollover is all financial analysis and more explicitly Dungeons and Dragons. Right? This is absolutely true. So I've been reading Lord of the Rings to one of my people, and it's interesting. The Hobbit's a mess, but the Lord of the Rings is pretty good. But there's definitely the scene in the Hobbit, which was rewritten for Lord of the Rings, right? When Bilbo comes across Gollum, that was rewritten in to fit the story that came later. But but basically, it's the D&D version would be Bilbo says, "I searched the area," right? And the what I would call the reality master rolls a 1,000,000-sided die and says, it comes up and it's and the answer is, "Oh, you find the one true ring." Carry on, right? But it's absolutely. And then a friend of mine was saying, "Well, how big would that die be?" So actually, I estimated it. So if you have every side was a centimeter, roughly, and there's circles tessellating the thing, roughly. So it's only about 5 meters, which is in diameter, which isn't that bad. Hi. Okay, I think. 5 meters. That's kind of plausible.
Well, would you know which
Million-sided die.
side of the face was actually up at that point?
Yeah. No, you'd have a big room that you could throw it around it, kick it,
I'm just
and you
thinking,
look down.
once you get to the top, they're all kind of
You need a level.
yeah, you need a little.
You guys can sort this out. You can sort this out. Very well made, 1,000,000-sided die.
Small differences in angles.
There's a great. I don't know if any of you read Terry Pratchett, but there's one in one of his books. There's a beautiful scene a scene that plays out of a part of the book where they try to make the odds 1 in a million because then they know they'll succeed. So 1 in 10,000 is not enough. 1 in 100,000. I think I have it in some slides later. But 1 in 100,000, that's not enough. Yeah, you're right. That's right. He has to blindfold him and stand on one leg. Yeah. Now it's 1 in a million. And now they will definitely succeed.
It was almost 1 in a million.
That's why it failed.
But then they fell, and the chances of somebody bringing a pool underneath them right at that time was 1 in a million.
So the story worked. Yeah. So he talks about narrativium, right? Which is there are 6 elements in the world, right? Earth, water, air, and fire. Element of surprise, which is his choice. And then narrativium, which is the stuff that's in stories. Yeah. Right. So you can't have, if it's 1 against 10,000, 1 in a million, for sure it works. It's great. Because it's a bias, right? They're the stories we like to write about. Yeah. But most stories are pretty boring. Got up, went to work, came home. Nothing really much happened, They say you're going to tell that story, but I don't know what's going on. But you.
It was this big. It was a little 6-week-old golden retriever.
Oh my God! All right. Here's another reason we're all individuals, right? You may recognize this scene. So we think that, but of course we're not really. We follow each other. So yeah, but because we're individuals, we tell stories as individuals, and it's harder for us to understand group behavior. We don't have metaphors for it very well. The metaphors that we predominantly use are of individuals. We think of the thing as having a head and some limbs and all sorts of stuff, right? We're spectacular imitators. Oh my God! Right. So that never used to be blocked, but now it is. I'm going to show you this a little bit. That's so disappointing. I guess it doesn't know where this is in the world.
Is that the yoga tablet?
Yeah.
Is that what it is? Can I get this to work? I'm going to give up. History, thing. Yeah. We'll play with it.
What bird elaborate has most elaborate, beautiful, most complex? I guess there are lots of contenders. But this bird has most elaborate.
It's playing in another place. Side of this. Yeah. All right.
He clears a space in the forest to serve as his concert platform. persuade females to come close and admire his plumes, he sings the most complex song he can manage, and he does that by copying the songs of all the other birds he hears around him, such as the kookaburra.
Pretty good. That's pretty good.
It's a very convincing impersonation.
Cookies.
Even the original is fooled.
Because they laugh together. They'll laugh together at sunset. They'll have it.
He can imitate the calls of at least 20 different species. He also, in his attempt to outsing his rivals, incorporates other sounds that he hears in the forest. That was a camera shutter. And again. And now a camera with a motor drive. And that's a car alarm. And now the sounds of foresters and their chainsaws working nearby.
They really are good imitators. Yeah, well, they really are. Yeah, you can get very confused. Very.
That'd be really annoying if you.
No, you come over the hill and there's a.
And they always heard car alarms, so they always thought they only copied car alarms.
Oh, that's so annoying. Yeah, they have a crazy larynx structure. They're really fantastic at doing that. You should look up the superb lyrebird. It's on one of the coins in Australia. It's cool. Yeah, because it's actually they're lyres, right? But it's not. It's a lyre with a YRE. It's the musical instrument, right? Their tails are beautiful. Yeah. Okay, so we talked about the Mona Lisa. Got stolen. Parodies, very small. And these attributes of it that this is the piece that really is annoying. I told you about this just now. Boom, boom, boom. All these things. So that's the first mistake: is thinking that it comes from spreading comes from a single source, right? It's this match story. Gamers might like that one. The second one is okay. You realize it's not about the source, but okay, so it's about people sharing things with each other and reinforcing it out in the wild. So let's go and mess with those. And these guys are trying so hard to control social. They really, really are trying so hard to find ways to hop into your social interactions and to say, you should tell him about that. And it's, of course, Facebook, as a human, and there are various kind of fun videos about that one, right, where a Facebook-like entity walks around and knocks on doors and just does what Facebook does. Basically a sociopath, so. Which is the great irony of it. It's a sociopathic institution built on social trust, which it's seeking to erode, essentially, right? So it lives off this mine of social trust, which it's constantly, it's eating it up.
Well, what I was wondering is,
My point of view.
if it, based on some of this research, is there a way to distinguish between people's interest, like basic social instinct of sharing or of demonstrating?
Yeah, can't help itself,
So is that,
which is like fashion, right?
yeah. So like I don't know, and I think it's an interesting question on what we can get at with research, but there's this interest in demonstrating or sharing that comes from the internet, or did you like sort of manifest itself in different ways before?
Oh, it's been there forever. Oh, it's been there forever. My argument is humans basically live on stories, right? So they're always sharing. The advent of language, we shared that with ourselves all over the place. The alphabet was contagious. That's a Glick line, right? yeah, we are using tools, copying and so on, right? I mean, octopuses do it, which is fun, right? I mean, there are all these kinds of experiments where we surprise ourselves by finding out that animals copy each other in certain ways, of their own volition, right? Very fun octopus one was 2 octopuses in a tank. They tend to eat each other. They're not very social, but they're good learning things. So one figures out how to open some puzzle to get at the unfortunate clam inside or whatever it was, right? And and they had to do something they had to like fish something out of something, literally in some way. Okay, so they had to solve some puzzle. And the other one's just watching, and then they put the puzzle in there and they just do it straight away, right? I mean, it's just built into, it's just a massive advantage for species to have that ability to share and not just run on instinct, right? I mean, it can go horribly wrong, obviously, right? Yeah. But it's very powerful. All right, so once you see you're out there, you have this kind of, we realize it's this kind of story. And this is how things, well, here's a statement of how spreading works, right? Super spreading. So it's lots of average people who are trusting each other, connected to each other, who are, for whatever reason, about this entity or thing that's being spread, they enjoy receiving it and they want to spread it, right? I had the example of BuzzFeed that their jokes and goofy things, they're the things that spread very easily, they're very lightweight, they're very easy to share. I mean, it's made it easier to have the web, obviously, because you can share photos, you can share, all these things we can just pass very easily. Especially something like a photo, it doesn't get adulterated, right? If it's messages, then they can change a little bit. But, all right, so we had this. I know, right? Everything. These are the things that spread. Yeah. And then this is an article that appeared in the Atlantic recently. So which basically is saying a lot of what I'm saying here, right? So that this is some sort of absurd thing. The dark social. So these are links that happen online, connections that people make where it's not being tracked. I guess you should be amazed by how much is being tracked by, by online things. It's pretty bad. So my version of it is really that this is the real dark social, is this. And, measurable web stuff is pretty small, right?
Dark social, like dark
Unmeasured. Yeah, not evil, just it's like dark matter.
so arguably evil.
Yeah, that's a secondary piece to it. But this is just, we're sharing, like you tell someone about the chocolate you ate the other day or whatever, or, this thing is funny or whatever, as a human to another human, Yeah, which upsets some of these large institutions because they would like to. I mean, everyone from, Facebook to the NSA wants to quantify those things so they can empower themselves. This is my claim. So this is what you want, right? People spreading like this. You want that. So you advertise, you talk about it, you're excited about it. And then you get too excited and you don't do this, where you don't put your square into the connections. That's the idea. And if the thing doesn't spread, then you change the thing, you keep working on it, and then they start spreading it. But so the story is, this is what you want, so you start to try to spread it. This is fine. Advertising is fine. You just tell people about it. You don't mess with the personal interactions because this is eroding social trust. Eventually, it's bad for everyone. Very tempting to do it. And of course, we'll keep trying to do it in bad ways. And then this little thing was just, you just keep trying again and again and again. Right? And you modify what you have as you need to. All right, so I'll fix that up. But that's some sort of, overall story then for all of these things, spreading and success and, huge features of social systems, which are incredibly important, right? And they will continue to be so more and more and more. There's no stopping that. Okay.